Hey everyone, this morning people are sending so many tributes to Rock and Roll Hall of Famer Leon Russell. Before the world said goodbye to Leon Russell, there was a truth he carried that never made headlines. It was about George Harrison. These two legends stood together at one of the most defining musical events. Everyone saw the fame, the music, and the success. But what Russell witnessed behind the scenes was completely shocking. Russell experienced what Harrison was really like when the lights were off, the crowds were gone, and the pressure was unbearable. And this truth about Harrison's personal life would shock you. Russell and Harrison's iconic partnership. In August 1971, two musicians already respected as masters in their own lanes crossed paths at a moment that would change the meaning of rock collaboration. Leon Russell and George Harrison shared a stage during one of the most ambitious live events the genre had ever seen. The night felt like a celebration, but behind it was hard work, rehearsals, late nights, and nonstop musical problem solving. For Russell, it was a rare chance to see Harrison up close, away from Beatle fame and studio polish, and what he witnessed stayed with him. Leon Russell had been working professionally since his teens. Born Claude Russell Bridges on April 2nd, 1942 in Lawton, Oklahoma, he built his reputation the hard way with long hours, many roles, and no spotlight guaranteed. By the late 1960s, he was known across the industry as a musician who could do almost anything. The nickname Master of Space in time wasn't marketing. It came from peers who watched him move between piano, guitar, arranging, producing, and leading bands without losing momentum. His resume already included sessions and collaborations with artists at the very top of popular music, and his songwriting had real emotional reach. George Harrison arrived at that same moment from a different direction. Born February 25, 1943 in Liverpool, he had spent a decade inside the most famous band in the world. As lead guitarist to the Beatles, he had grown from a quiet junior member into a songwriter capable of standing shoulder to shoulder with Lennon and McCartney. Away from charts and touring, Harrison had also pushed himself into Indian classical music, studying and collaborating closely with Ravi Shankar. By 1971, Harrison was no longer interested in being just a former Beatle. He wanted to use his influence with intention. That intention took shape as the concert for Bangladesh held on August 1st, 1971 at Madison Square Garden, organized by Harrison and Shankar. The concert aimed to raise funds and awareness for refugees affected by the Bangladesh Liberation War. What made it unprecedented wasn't just the cause, but the scale. Major artists committed their time with little rehearsal and no guarantee of perfection. The lineup included Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, Ringo Starr, Badfinger, Billy Preston, and Leon Russell. It was a working musician's environment under global scrutiny. Russell's role was immediate and physical. His medley of Jumpin', Jack Flash, and Youngblood was raw and high energy, cutting through the formality that often hangs over benefit events. When he later joined Harrison for Beware of Darkness, a song from All Things Must Pass, the contrast was striking. Russell didn't soften Harrison's writing or compete with it. He supported it, giving the song weight without excess. That balance, knowing when to lead and when to stay out of the way, is something Russell was known for. And Harrison definitely noticed. During the concert, Harrison wasn't just performing. He was managing pressure few musicians ever face. He was coordinating artists, overseeing sound, and carrying the responsibility of the cause itself. After the shows, he stayed involved as producer of the live triple album with Phil Spector, released in December 1971, and the concert film that followed in 1972. The project raised millions for UNICEF and went on to win the 1973 Grammy Award for Album of the Year. It also set a template for every large-scale benefit concert that came after. For Russell, those weeks weren't just career-expanding. They were revealing. Harrison worked with quiet intensity, often reserved in public, but deeply focused behind the scenes. He was serious about the cause. Russell saw the strain that came with that responsibility and the discipline required to carry it. Their connection didn't turn into a long recording partnership, but it definitely endured in subtler ways. Russell's participation in the concert tied his name permanently to a moment when rock music proved it could act collectively and responsibly. Years later, Harrison's Dark Horse Records partnered with BMG to preserve and reissue Harrison's catalog, keeping the concert for Bangladesh era alive for new listeners. From the outside, the Bangladesh concerts looked like triumph after triumph. However, inside them, both men were carrying personal weight. Russell understood that kind of pressure well, and what he witnessed during that period would later shape how he spoke about success, exhaustion, and what it cost to keep going. Because behind the applause and historic headlines, Leon Russell's private life was already marked by struggles that threatened to upend everything he had built. Leon Russell's hidden struggles. Leon Russell carried physical and emotional weight long before success ever entered the picture. His difficulties didn't begin in adulthood or during career decline. They were present from birth, shaping how he moved, played, and saw himself long before audiences knew his name. Russell was born with serious complications. During delivery, a doctor reportedly pulled too hard, damaging his second and third vertebrae. The injury caused nerve damage often described as cerebral palsy-like in effect. His right side was weaker, slightly paralyzed, and he walked with a noticeable limp. His right hand never had the same strength or control as his left. Yet, instead of ending his musical ambitions, the limitation forced adaptation. Russell leaned heavily into his left hand on the piano, developing a style that felt unorthodox but powerful. A style listeners later praised as originality actually began as necessity. At 4 years old, Russell experienced an incident that left a deeper psychological mark. A stern aunt discovered him in an innocent childhood situation with a cousin and reacted harshly. She paraded him in front of family members, publicly shaming him and accusing him of wrongdoing he didn't fully understand. The moment stuck, and Russell later spoke about how that humiliation planted a lasting sense of shame and confusion. It affected how he viewed himself and how easily he assumed blame even when none was deserved. Those early experiences followed him into adulthood. Even as his career took off by the late 1960s and early 1970s, Russell was everywhere. He was writing major songs, producing records, performing at historic concerts, and leading his own bands. From the outside, it looked unstoppable. But internally, the insecurity never left. When the industry shifted in the late 1970s and early 80s, Russell's position changed fast. His record sales dropped, radio moved on, and labels stopped prioritizing him. The transition was abrupt. He went from headlining large venues to playing small clubs, sometimes to audiences who barely recognized his name. The decline wasn't gradual enough for him to adjust emotionally. One decade, he was essential. The next, he was overlooked. Financial strain followed. Much of the money Russell earned during his peak years disappeared through poor deals, management issues, and the simple cost of keeping a band on the road. Touring became less about artistic choice and more about survival. He played constantly to cover expenses, often without the industry support younger or more fashionable artists received. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, Russell was living quietly in Nashville, largely absent from mainstream conversation. Despite being a key figure in rock history, he watched peers receive honors, retrospectives, and renewed attention. While his own contributions were rarely highlighted, comparisons were hard to avoid, especially with artists like Elton John, who openly credited Russell as a major influence, yet enjoyed far greater public recognition. Russell expressed frustration about this imbalance, not out of bitterness toward others, but from a sense that his work had slipped through the cracks. That sense of being forgotten weighed heavily on him. Russell had spent decades supporting other artists, writing for them, producing them, and lifting their records with his playing. Yet, he stood alone when his own visibility faded. In 2010, Elton John stepped in directly, collaborating with Russell on the album The Union. The project brought Russell back into public view and introduced his work to a new generation. The renewed attention was welcome, but it also showed how much help he needed to regain footing in an industry that had once relied on him so heavily. Sadly, that same year, Russell faced a serious health crisis. He underwent brain surgery to correct a buildup of fluid, a condition that temporarily halted his career and threatened his ability to perform. Recovery was slow, and even in his final years, his health continued to decline. He dealt with heart disease and other complications which limited his stamina and mobility as he aged. Throughout his life, Russell was known for a pessimistic streak. People close to him noticed a pattern. When presented with both a hopeful interpretation and a negative one, he instinctively chose the darker conclusion. This outlook showed decades of physical hardship, early shame, and repeated professional disappointment. Self-doubt remained constant, even when evidence suggested he deserved far more confidence. The same need for control that helped him survive childhood injuries, industry neglect, and financial loss didn't disappear once his career stabilized. It followed him into business deals, marriages, and creative choices where disagreements turned public and loyalty was tested. By the late 1970s, the struggles that once stayed private began spilling into lawsuits, breakups, and criticism that reshaped how the world saw him. The scandals Leon Russell faced. One of the most damaging conflicts Leon Russell faced centered on Shelter Records. The label Russell co-founded in 1969 with producer Denny Cordell. Shelter Records was created to give artists freedom at a time when labels were tightening control. Early on, it worked. The label became respected quickly, signing artists like Tom Petty and J.J. Cale, releasing records that felt artist-driven rather than corporate. However, as the label expanded, cracks began to appear. Money management became a point of contention. Decisions about ownership, control, and long-term direction caused tension between Russell and Cordell. By the late 1970s, the disagreements had escalated into legal battles. Lawsuits followed, and the partnership deteriorated publicly. What began as a shared vision turned into a prolonged dispute that drained Russell financially and emo. Finally, the fallout weakened Shelter Records and left Russell wary of future business arrangements, reinforcing his belief that control was safer than trust. At the same time, his personal life was unraveling in full view of the public. In 1975, Russell married singer Mary McCreary, and the relationship quickly became intertwined with his work. Together, they released Wedding Album, a project that blended marriage and collaboration into a single statement. The closeness that fueled the album also created tension. Creative disagreements didn't stay in the studio. They carried into the marriage where control, expectations, and constant touring created even more strain. By 1980, the marriage had ended in divorce. The separation was not private. It drew attention because the partnership had been so visible. Russell also had 6 children, and balancing family life with an exhausting schedule proved difficult. Touring, recording, and managing business conflicts left little space for stability at home. The pressure showed, and the breakup added to a growing perception that Russell's life was increasingly chaotic behind scenes. Criticism followed him musically as well. In the late 1970s, Russell released country-leaning albums under the pseudonym Hank Wilson. The decision confused fans who associated him with rock, blues, and gospel-influenced piano music. Some critics accused him of abandoning his roots or distancing himself from his own reputation. Others questioned why an established artist would hide behind another name. The Hank Wilson albums didn't perform strongly. Their modest sales kept the debate alive and added to the sense that Russell was drifting away from the spotlight. While country music had always been part of his background, the move came at a time when his visibility was already fading, which made the shift look risky rather than exploratory. Another source of controversy Russell had to deal with was the strained working relationships he had. Russell had a reputation for being demanding in the studio. He expected musicians to be prepared, focused, and precise. During the Shelter Records years, especially sessions could become tense. Some musicians later said he was difficult to work with, not because of ego, but because he insisted on control.